How much do comic creators make? I've got some page rates for you, and you might not like it. Greetings, people of the internet. I'm Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. Welcome, mad creators, to the underground laboratory where we create robots, aliens, zombies, and other imminent threats to humanity. We also create comics, and this is another part of my little sort of mini series on indie comics. Just some hard facts about sort of the comic industry and some of the things you're going to deal with if you want to be a professional comic book artist. We've talked about some of the more negative aspects of just the comic book industry, and I think this is going to be more of the same, but I'm not really doing this to throw too much shade, and and maybe some of you people starting off may look at some of these page rates that I'm going to get to and saying, well, that's not so bad. But if you're like me and you've worked as a professional artist in other industries, sometimes even doing comic work in those other industries, you'll find that the page rates and the compensation for doing comics, even from some of the bigger publishers, isn't really that great in comparison. One thing that I always like to compare to is, like, I used to do a lot of storyboards. Now, storyboards are similar to comics. It's visual storytelling. You're telling a story visually a lot of times, sometimes in panels, not necessarily the same as comics, but it is akin to comics. However, I remember doing storyboards, and the compensation for doing storyboards was pretty good. I mean, there were some drawbacks to it. One of the big ones was everything was a rush job. But a lot of times you got to double your rates if something needed to be turned around like the next day or whatever. So it was pretty lucrative. Eventually I kind of got burned out on that. It's sort of, in some ways, it's a young man's game because you are staying up late nights putting these things out there. But it did pay really well in compared to comics. Now, storyboards are usually very, very rough. It is the equivalent to what your rough sketches before you even get to your comic books would be like. It does not take anywhere as long based on the amount, like a page of storyboards versus the page of artwork. Obviously, if you're storyboarding a whole film or whatever, that could take quite a bit longer. And usually when you're storyboarding, you're only doing the action sequences. You're not doing any of the, those quieter moments, the talking heads and things, because you just don't need to, show action with those. But all in all, it pays quite a bit better. But that's one of the comparisons. The other thing is just doing, like, characters. Say if you're doing illustration of a particular comic book superhero that's going to be on, say, a lunchbox or t-shirt or whatever, a lot of times that pays more than your page rates, and a lot of times it doesn't take as long, because the thing is, I mean, nowadays especially, I mean, when you look at some of the artwork that is out there right now, it just blows me away, the amount of detail, and it seems to be getting, I mean, the competition. There's so many books out there right now. Even though comics don't sell like they did back in the 90s, there are still way more comics now. It's crazy, and there's just so much work out there, and it seems like the artwork more or less gets, I don't want to say better, because obviously there were a lot of great artists back then, but it seems the expectation to put more into it, I mean, the detail and all that stuff, it seems like it's kind of amped up than when you go further back in the history of comics. And because of that, it takes a lot longer to make a page. So when I talk about what a page rate is, you have to really think about, well, how long does it actually take to make a page? And I think that's what some people aren't thinking about, but it's something you have to think about. So anyway, so I've got a list that I just printed off. I found a website on the internet that basically surveyed a bunch of different comic artists that work for a number of different comic book companies. These are some of the big ones. Now, this goes back, I think this survey was done back in 2017, if I'm correct. But I'm pretty sure that the rates have not gone up. If anything, maybe down a little bit. I don't think they've gone up too much. So I still think, if you're watching this right now, we're in 2020, I don't think these have probably changed that much. And I will put a link to where you can find this, because there's a lot of great information on here that I'm not even going to cover, that you can go and do research. But I was just happy to find this, because I know when I was coming up and looking into either breaking in the comic industry or just educating myself what comic creators make and everything. There was not any of this information out there. So the fact that this is out there, this is great. Now I don't know if this is 100% accurate. I can't validate that, but it seems from people that I've talked to that work for some of these companies, it seems to be concurrent with the information that's in there. So I'm just going to go down the list. Like I said, I'm not going to cover everything. If you like, for instance, if you want to know what flatters get paid, I'm not going to really go into lettering and things like that. All that information is in there though, so you can check that out. I'll leave a link to where you can find this, but this is just a great resource. So anyway, let me go down, and I just want to go through this and give you some of my thoughts and just give you an idea of what some of these different publishers pay. Mostly we're going to be talking about penciling, inking, maybe sometime with the writing. Might get into a little bit on that, but some of these aren't even really, they don't even list writers, so maybe I don't know what the case is. And there's some things that I'm not exactly sure on, and I'll try to dissect it as much as I can, and you'll see when we get into this. But anyway, so first up, and I think these are all in alphabetical order. So first up is Archie Comics. Everyone knows Archie Comics. Now Archie Comics has had sort of a resurgence, but it's sort of going in a different direction. They're still publishing the classic kind of Archie stories, but they've also, with the success of like Riverdale and that, you know, and that stuff, they've gone in some different directions. So when you typically think classically at Archie Comics, you think a little more simpler style, and simple can be deceiving when you're talking about how long it takes to do something, because I know I have friends that have worked on like Scooby-Doo and comics, and also like SpongeBob and things like that, and they're pretty quick, but it's still, you getting that stuff to look on model and everything, it's not always as easy. Sometimes when you're dealing with like characters like Marvel, DC type characters, you can fudge it a little bit, you can add a little detail, you can sheet things around. That's not as easy to do when you're dealing with, you know, capturing the likenesses and staying on model with some of these more simpler characters. So it's something to think about. So a lot of the way this is broken down, it's got the highest, the lowest, and the average rates per page, and these are all broken down. It's pretty common that there is a page rate for comics. When people are creating comics, it's based on what a page costs. And like I said, there are so many different factors that go into a page, how much detail is on it, you know, so the fact that there's just a standard one is kind of, you know, it's, you would think if people are putting more time into it, that can sort of up your page rate, but I don't know. Also, there is, and these are averages, because there are some artists that are, you know, more well known or have a great reputation that will get a larger page rate. And then there are some that are going to get quite a bit lower if you're just starting out. So this is, again, this is all an average. Now with Archie, it seems like they have one, it's pretty much down, it says the highest rate, and there's nothing listed under lowest or average, but it's a penciler, $95 for a page in an Archie comic. And then it also lists line art. Now it doesn't list inking, so I'm guessing that when they say line art, they're meaning pencils and inks. So, and that rate is $225 per page. So that, I wouldn't think, because that's more than double that 95. So if you're doing pencils and inks, I'm not really sure what they mean by line art. And there's some places do list pencils and inks and line art, but so there's a big difference. For cover art, it looks like what they pay for covers on this, and again, this could just be an average. Maybe some people are making a lot less, but it says cover art $500, which compared to other comic book publishers, I'm not saying compared to like professional illustration work, because I don't really do many illustrations. I would say $500 for an illustration is about as low as I'm probably gonna go. But for comics anyway, $500, that seems pretty good for Archie. So, but I don't know that difference between pencils and line art, that 95 for pencils versus the 225 for Archie. So anyway, so that's Archie. Next we're going down to Boom Studios, and when you look through that, there's a lot of other things that you should pay attention to. That's why I want you to go to this website, because there's other things with the how fast these companies pay, and from what I read, Boom Studios is typically late with their payments and things. So that's all other information that you want to know about. Anyway, so yeah, so here, let's see what we got here. And this one does have like scripts, $50 for a comic book script per page. Now that I don't know. I don't think that's per page script. I think that's a total script. I don't think they do page rates for script. I could be wrong. I might be wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. That I'm not sure because I'm more of an illustrator. But anyway, so here we've got, doesn't list pencilers, but it does list line art and it lists inks. So that one I don't know. The line art for Boom Studios is $100 a page versus inks $20. That is like nothing. That's really bad. So yeah, I don't know how they separate that because, like I said, there's no pencils on there. $100 a page. I've seen some Boom Studio titles and some of them are quite detailed. They've got some licensed products and things that they do. That is not, I mean, unless you're like Jack Kirby and you can pump out like 3 pages a day or something. Think about $100 a day for your talent and everything. And you know, I don't think they're hiring, you know, I mean, the people that are working there are good artists. So that seems pretty bad in my opinion. And sometimes even some, yeah, it's pretty much bad all around in my opinion. But anyway, so let's move on to Dark Horse Comics. So line art for Dark Horse Comics, they have listed at $200. That is a little better. It's twice what it seems like Boom Studios is paying for their line art. For their scripts, again, maybe I just won't talk about scripts because I don't know if that's per page or per full script, but 110. I'm not sure. Here they have listed, and then they've got colors. It looks like, oh, now Dark Horse probably does a lot of painted covers, I think, because here on covers they've got listed $750 at the high rate. Now these were all high rates. On the low rate cover, it's $525. So it looks like Dark Horse pays quite a bit for covers. And again, this is average. So some of these more painterly covers that they do, that may offset some of the just standard sort of coloring that gets done. So you know, I think when you factor all that into, so there's still some guesswork here, but just to give you an idea. But it looks like colors, when you're doing a fully painted covers, if you're getting paid whatever, $750, depending on how long that takes. I mean, if it takes you a week to color a page, that's not great. So anyway, but yeah, so that's Dark Horse now. Yeah, so all in all, they're a little better as far as line art. I don't know if that's, I guess that's pencils and inks. That's still not great because you know, that still averages about $100 in inks, $100 pencils. So I don't know if you can pencil and ink a page in a day. So that might bring that right back down to similar to, you know, what the Boom Studios is. So again, not super great. So let's move on to one of the bigger comic book publishers. Let's move on to DC Comics. Pencils, same rate, but just for pencils, it says $200 and then $120 for ink. That is it says the high rate. There's nothing listed under average or whatever. So it sounds like DC pretty much that's pretty much their average, right around there. For colors, they charge, or they pay out at the high rate $135, and then the medium rate is $121, and then the low rate is $129. So that'll kind of give you an idea. Covers for DC Comics, cover artists usually are a little more skilled, more established, more in demand, because that's what's, I mean, say what you want, people do judge a book by its cover. So a cover for a DC Comics at the high rate pays $800. Now DC doesn't, I don't know that they do a lot of the painted covers like a Dark Horse might. So I think with that, it's more just the artist, because that might just be what you might get the same amount for doing a splash page in the interior, but because of the artist, they probably get paid more because DC wants to have great covers and everything. So medium rate for covers is $400, and well, this is weird. This is kind of off because is that me? Hold on, let me get back here. Lowest and average. Okay, so the lowest is in the middle here. So the lowest rate for a cover there is $400, and then the average is $633 for cover design. And I assume that's everything, that's colors, everything. That's probably not just the pencils. I'm not sure, or maybe that gets split up if you're working in tandem with other artists. Anyway, so yeah, that's DC Comics. On to Dynamite Comics, which they've got a lot of licensed products. Again, like a lot of licensed properties. Yeah, they don't pay a whole bunch. Line art, and I'm guessing that is pencils and inks because they don't list pencils or inks, just line art. $120, and that's the high rate. The low rate is $100 for both pencils and inks. That's not great. I mean, but some people just want to work with Dynamite because, you know, I want to work on G.I. Joe, or I want to work on Transformers or something like that. But man, and some of those books are pretty detailed. So yeah, that's not great, but you know, it is what it is. They pay, I guess they pay, in comparison to the other comic book publishers, they pay a decent amount for covers, the high being $700, and then average $388, and low is $250 for cover. And we've got IDW, another, you know, a lot of these, not the big two, the ones, the bigger publishers under that, they're mostly, and I think I was wrong when I mentioned G.I. Joe and Transformers because I said Dynamite Comics. That's not the case. They do have licenses. Well, I meant IDW. That shows you how much I pay attention to modern comics. I pay a little attention, but I think IDW does have the license for G.I. Joe and Transformers, so I sort of take that back. So we'll see. But yeah, it's kind of the same thing. It's actually, so they do have that broken up. Here we've got pencils, $110, and they only list the high on that. Inks, $100 for inks, and then it does list line art, which I believe is both of them, which, so if you're doing the line art, both pencils and inks, I'm guessing that's what it is. That's $200 is their highest, then goes to lowest, $150, and the average at around $175. That's IDW. Not so crazy great on their colors in comparison, or their covers in comparison, the highest being $275. But again, they've got those licenses and people want to work on them, you know, and you can say, oh, I did work on a Transformers or whatever the case is. If you can bang out 3 pages in a day, which I don't know too many artists that can, maybe, but you know, if you put out a page a day and you're making $100 a page, that is, you know, you can get just I mean, why waste your talent on that? I don't know, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, so now we're at Image Comics. Now this one's a little different and a little tricky because I don't think Image Comics really pays page rates. I mean, all their titles are creator owned. Now I think what this has to do with is, and they are a little higher here, which is good, but what I think this is, like I said, Image Comics doesn't pay page rates to my knowledge, but if you are a writer and you create an idea for a comic, you sell it to Image Comics, and then you have to hire an illustrator to do that, I'm guessing that I guess they set up their own arrangement, but in some cases the artists may not even own part of that book. And this is also the same with like Alterna, which isn't listed here. I don't know if they were as well. They were, you know, they've been around for a while. I don't know, since they started publishing newsprint or whatever the case is. Maybe they're just not big enough to be on this list, or weren't at this time. But it's kind of the same thing where Alterna publishes all creator-owned properties, so it's up to that creative team if a writer comes up with an idea to hire those other people. And that's kind of the weird thing with creator-owned. It's not always every creator, unless the writer decides to give some of the profits and some of the credits and split ownership of that title with the artist, which in some cases it isn't. So I think that's sort of where the page rates come in with some of these creator-owned publishers. So if you come up with an idea for a comic, then you hire an illustrator. I'm guessing that's what these sort of page rates are. They're a little higher than some of the other ones, but that also might be offset by the fact that, say, if you're working on a Robert Kirkman title, first of all, I think he splits ownership of his books with the artist, with the creative team, and from my understanding, Robert Kirkman pays probably the highest amount that anyone is going to get in the comic industry for work that they're doing on one of those titles. And he can afford to do that because titles tend to sell pretty well, and he's doing quite well with The Walking Dead and everything. But maybe that offsets what these page rates are. I don't know what Robert Kirkman pays per page. Let's say it's $500. I'm just throwing that out of the hat. It's because I know it's decent, and that's why people tend to stay with his titles, because they're getting paid well. So why move to another comic that pays less? But anyway, let's say he pays $500 per page. I don't know what he pays, but that's higher, and I know he pays higher. So let's say that's the case. Maybe some other creator that's working on Image Comics might hire somebody and pay them $100 per page. That's why this might be a little higher, because you're offsetting the people that are getting paid more. I'm guessing that's how that works. I'm not exactly sure. But so anyway, so Image Comics, for what it's worth, again, they publish creator owns. They're not really paying page rates to my knowledge. But here it says it lists pencils as $240 the highest. Average $180, inks $160, that's the only figure they give, and colors the high of $100 and an average of $65 per page. That's not good. But again, that's all set up. That's not really like an Image Comics thing. That's whatever that creative team is, whatever they're negotiating for their creator-owned projects. So that's Image Comics. And last but not least, the biggest of them all, Marvel Comics. So let's see what the most successful comic book publisher pays out. Is it more than all the rest? Is it about the same? Let's see. At the highest for pencils, it's $180. And I think, let me go back to DC because these are the two you're going to compare. Where is DC Comics? All right, so DC for pencils, they pay $200, so a little bit more for DC, even though Marvel is definitely the bigger of those publishers. I think by a pretty decent margin. I mean, DC Comics is obviously the second biggest publisher, but I think there's a pretty big gap between them. I could be wrong, maybe that's closed lately, I don't know. But anyway, so pencils, a high of $180 for Marvel Comics, the low of $160, average $173, has listed inks, high of $120, lowest $90, and $100 is the average for inks. Again, you got to keep in mind, if you're doing penciling on a page and it takes you, if it takes a day, 180 a day, you could make that work. You could live off of that. And the other thing that I didn't mention, that if you are on a title like Marvel or DC, if you do, there are some other benefits, name recognition when you go to, first of all, your original pages, which you should get them back. You can sell those at a premium. You could sell those original pages way more than you actually got paid that page rate for. So there are some benefits to that, and because those are characters and a publisher that people know, the chances of you being able to sell those are a lot better. So that's one thing. Also, going to conventions and things like that, doing commissions and all that kind of thing, it does help if you are a Marvel or DC artist. So there are some benefits, but that shouldn't be neither here nor there in my opinion. Publishers should pay fairly, and all that other stuff shouldn't even come into the equation. They shouldn't say, well, we're only going to pay you $100 or $150 a day, but you could figure out other ways to make money, just off of name recognition at conventions. That should be totally separate. But anyway, so yeah, so that's pretty much, that's kind of the hard and fast truth of it. Yeah, it's not great when you consider that, like I said, I mean, and I know logo design isn't really a comparison to comic book art, but when I do a logo design, I get paid quite a bit for doing a logo design. It takes me not nearly as much time as it would to create a whole comic book page. Also, that comparison of the storyboard. It's just kind of sad that these rates are what they are for the amount of money or the amount of research and development, creating these characters, coming up with ideas that later become something like a billion-dollar movie franchise. Yeah, it's really not that great, but I just wanted to put this out there. Again, I'm going to leave a link to where you can find all of this information online if you haven't already come across it just in your regular Googling. It didn't take me long to find it via Google, but I thought it'd be good just to go through here, give you my thoughts. And again, this is just part of my independent comic series, mini-series, whatever you want to call it. I'll put these out here, but it's just to kind of bring the comic book industry into light and maybe, persuade some of you guys that maybe there are other better ways to make money, more money doing comics. I've managed to do it just by creating comic-related things. I've got digital products featuring, comic book brushes, and I've published workbooks on comics and all that kind of stuff. And I'm still a comic book creator. I still make my own comics as well, but there are other ways to be a professional comic book artist. And I guess not get kicked around so much, because this is, as far as professional artists get paid, and pretty much anyone that's working for these companies, I mean, they're just not taking anyone. They're taking the best of the best. And for you to be the best of the best, and this is what you're getting paid, it's not great. But people want to work with these companies. They want to work with these characters, and so they're willing to do it for what I think are sort of unfair. But I wanted to bring that to your attention. So yeah, those are some comic book page rates, some of my thoughts on it. You can let me know what you think. Am I wrong? Do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments section, and I will see you guys later. That is all. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media, and now you can support the work that I do on Patreon. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.